Imagine if you could have a dinner party and you could invite anybody. Not anybody that's alive, but anybody from history. Who would be sitting around your dinner table with you? Now, I don't want just one dinner party because I'm greedy. I would want the dinner party with my loved ones that have died. I'd love to have a dinner party with my grandfather and my great uncle and my great aunt and maybe my aunt. You know, sometimes you're like, maybe we've had enough meals. But like, there's your awesome table. Like, if you could have the closest people around, that would be the best meal. Or then there's the meal that you have those people that have been recorded in some kind of history, whether that is famous leaders, rulers, or whether it's religious characters. And if I was to have a kind of anybody from the Bible, I think I would like to have maybe Rachel and Leah, maybe Miriam, definitely Mary Magdalene, and then I think I'd want to ask Paul, because I would want to know how he would react surrounded by all these powerful women. And I would also like to say, were you recorded in history how you wanted to be? But we can't say how history is going to record our life on this earth. And we can't change how the world has recorded everybody's history. But the reality is that each one of us will die. And what is difficult with these readings are that it gives hope that at that last moment there may be a miracle. If you ask most people in the general public out on the streets, how many resurrection stories are there in the Bible? The normal answer would just be Jesus. But the truth is that people were resurrected a number of times. There are, I'm trying to remember how many in the Old Testament, but there's at least 3 in the New Testament in addition to Jesus's. But I guess Jesus's was special because the others, it appears to be that they were resurrected and carried on their normal life. Whereas Jesus, when he came back as a resurrected body, did strange things like appear suddenly in a room or kind of at a beach. And then he didn't seem to have a funeral and a proper end because there are records that he ascended. But this isn't a sermon about the kind of what actually happened to Jesus. This is a sermon about death and how we cope with the reality that all of our lives on this earth will come to an end as we know it. One of my first memories of death was when I was 7. I was at my grandparents' house. They lived on the farm. They had a little bungalow just down the road from where we lived. And I remember that we all went, and my mom said, go and see your grandfather and give him a hug. And it was one of the few times I actually went into his bedroom, because it's my grandparents' bedroom, and why would I do that? But I remember going in, and he was lying there, and he looked so happy. Now, he was a farmer all his life, and he had been in the farm milking the cows 2 days earlier. And I'd never seen him clean, quite like I'd seen him. And I'd never seen him looking so relaxed. But I remember giving him a huge hug and telling him I loved him. And then I went back into the living room, and there was my parents and my grandma and my aunts and uncles and my cousins. And there was tea and cookies, and we were telling stories. And I'm not sure at what point I realized, but he had died. And I have this amazing memory of my grandfather at peace and at rest. And I can almost smell the room. It smelt just like him. And I just treasure that moment. I treasure that my parents said it was okay for us to do that. But that meant that I knew what had happened. It wasn't like he was suddenly taken from us. But how do you want to die? We can't generally predict it, and we can't, at the very end, normally have too much control. But how do you want to spend your last few hours on this earth? One privilege, honor, joy of being a priest is that we get to journey with people on those precious few last hours. And I remember when I was in Cambridge in England, I was working in a hospice, and the rooms there are very much like the hospital rooms here. And there was this gentleman who had come in, and for the first 3 days he had no visitors. And I would go in and have a conversation with him, and it sounded like there was nobody in his life. And then he spoke about how he shared this house with his brother, and that they were both bachelors, and that they both worked for local authorities. But for the last 20-odd years, they hadn't spoken. They had separate living rooms in this house, separate bedrooms, separate fridges, and I kind of was like, do you have separate bathrooms? I was just imagining this house with this big dividing wall around it. The next day, there was a visitor in the room. And going by the family resemblance, it just had to be his brother. And they were chatting along, and after about an hour, laughter came out of this room. And I just thought, I've got to go in. So I went in, and I just was like, what are you laughing at? And they were laughing because they couldn't remember what argument had caused them not to speak for 20-odd years. When his brother left, this man had been transformed. He looked much calmer, his shoulders had come down, and he just seemed a different person. The next morning I came in, and the first room I wanted to go in to see was his. And as I entered the room, I saw a freshly made bed, and his name had gone from the door. What acts do you need to do in order that you can be at peace? The other story is from Philadelphia. When I was at the University of Penn, and I had the joy of carrying the 3 pages, and one of them went off, and it was the one that said, go immediately to the intensive care ward, you are needed. And so off I went, and I entered this room with this gentleman sipping with a straw a can of soda with 10 family members around, and I thought I had the wrong room. And they said, oh, good, you're here. We want to celebrate communion together. Can you do that for us? And I said, absolutely. Let me go and get the bread and the wine, and I'll be back up. Is it okay that I'm Episcopalian? And they said, it's fine, we're Lutheran. So that was okay. So I went up, and we shared communion together, and this man took communion with his wife, his children, and his grandchildren. And during the prayers, they all gave thanks for this man and what he had given to them. After we celebrated communion, they asked the nurse to come in. And they flipped a few switches on the side. And the daughter said, "It's fine. We've all talked about it. We're withdrawing this treatment from him." Within half an hour, he was unable to communicate. And within an hour and a half or two, he was in a beautiful coma. And that evening, he passed away. How many of us want our loved ones around us for that final meal and that final chance to say thank you? I put on Facebook in the middle of the week, if you could have 1 minute with somebody who has died, what would you say to them in that minute? What would you want that minute to look like? And the answers fell into two categories. The first one was, I am sorry. I am sorry for this. I'm sorry for that. And then the second one is the gratitude. I thank you for being my husband, father. I thank you for giving me this. I thank you for inspiring me. Death is a reality of this world. And Jesus asks us to journey through that reality with compassion. So what does your meal look like with your loved ones around you? I know as I journey up to this table, I have the memories of sharing communion with my grandfather and my great uncle and my aunt. When I sit down at Christmas and we have the family meal, I think of all those loved ones that have shared that meal with us. The reality is that most of us won't have a resurrection story like we heard in the Old Testament and the Gospel. But we will journey through death with compassion. And we will all get to that meal where our amazing dinner party will happen with God and all the saints. The saying goes, I'm not afraid of death, I'm afraid of dying. But the reality is we've got to talk about death so that we can be comfort ourselves and one another in the dying process. We have this meal to sustain us in this world because there is the heavenly banquet waiting for us. So let us have compassion on ourselves, knowing that God has already forgiven us for all those things we want to say to our loved ones that we regret. I know that God is able to transform those gratitudes of thanks as well. Jesus is with us at all stages of our life and our death. Amen.